Piracy, that is internet piracy, has existed since the time paid online services or paid games emerged. Society, as you know, reacts to it very negatively, saying it is tied to theft and claiming that anyone who engaged in it should be jailed. This is evidenced by the very bans that countries implement. And the companies that fall victim to this piracy say it's awful, urging people never to do it, claiming that it devalues their services or games. They also argue that it supposedly reduces their sales, and that without piracy we could live peacefully and not have to deal with such issues. But what if I told you that these companies, which hypocritically claim that internet piracy is bad, secretly want you to pirate their products? And there are even companies that do this openly without warning people. These are not some no-name companies but large global organizations known by everyone on this planet. And what if I told you that piracy will never go away? And that piracy is neither inherently evil nor inherently good. It lies somewhere in between. So watch the video until the end and I'll open your eyes. Just to be clear, I am by no means promoting piracy. Any mention of illegal activities here is purely hypothetical. I'm not a legal expert, so don't take this as actual legal advice. Now let's start the video. My introduction to piracy began when I was 8 years old. Before that, I had no digital entertainment except for a TV where I watched cartoons, although they weren't always on, and I used to wake up early just to catch them. In 2012, my parents bought me my first computer. It was very weak and meant for office tasks. At the time, we didn't really have internet, so I bought game discs to play. And when I didn't have money for discs, my friends and I would just trade them to play something new. This continued until we finally got the internet. Initially, it had a limited data cap, so my parents forbade me from downloading games. But in 2014, we got a full-fledged internet connection at home. From that point on, I was completely free, with access to everything imaginable. I used programs to download games from pirate sites, not even realizing it was piracy, or as big companies would call it, theft. I downloaded games thinking they were free and didn't know that online platforms like Steam existed to sell game copies. But this lasted only until I grew up and realized it was all theft. Since then, I've been buying all my games from online platforms like Steam and even purchased programs for editing, plugins, and more. But recently, after watching some YouTube videos and reading articles and stories about piracy, I came to one conclusion. The real piracy of the past doesn't align with modern internet piracy. And a question arose, why do we even call this piracy today? And why do we get mad at people who pirate content online? In fact, today's piracy solves consumer problems and prevents big companies from getting too greedy. Let me explain it so you can clearly understand. Historically, no one knows exactly when piracy began. Some say it started in ancient Egypt when people learned how to buy and sell things, while others claim piracy began 5,000 years ago when ships were invented. No one can definitely say what the difference between piracy and theft is. Some argue that there is no difference, that theft is piracy. But as history showed us during the golden age of piracy in the 17th century, there is actually a big difference. This was a time when English farmers had their farms taken by wealthier individuals, leaving them no choice but to seek work elsewhere in cities. Of course, this led to overcrowding and created a huge gap in living conditions between the rich and poor. The only sensible solution was to do something about it. At the time, everyone understood that the working for the system meant losing to the wealthy, so the best solution was to take back what had been taken from them, and thus people turned to piracy. Although this method maintained equally in a brutal way, victims were inevitable. As technology evolved and times changed, piracy slowly faded. Many countries made it illegal, but that doesn't mean piracy disappeared altogether. It just started working in a different way. The culture of pirates sailing the seas vanished, but modern piracy became even more popular. The concept of piracy shifted. What if you could steal something without actually stealing? It's explained like this. Instead of stealing a single item, you just make a copy for yourself or for distribution. Everyone wins and there are no victims. This kind of piracy began in the 20th century and continues to this day. If people used to pirate music by duplicating records, now it's much more widespread. Today you can pirate almost anything on the internet, software, games, music, and so on. This kind of piracy is widely known as unofficial copying or distributing copyrighted works. Many call it theft, including CEOs of major companies that develop games, software, operating systems, and so on. Everyone is fiercely fighting against it, except for WinRAR, of course. But I want to dispel these myths about piracy with a clear example. Listen, piracy is not theft. It's just copyright infringement. Piracy and copyright are synonyms. When you engage in piracy, what you're violating is copyright. There is no theft involved. To explain it in simple terms, imagine we lived in a world where people hadn't learned how to copy things. All original games are with the author and he sells all his games on his own store. Let's call this author Rockstar Games, why not? He sells discs on his store because, as I said, no one has learned how to copy yet. Now if I were to come and rob his store, stealing all his GTA 6 games, for example, that would be theft because Rockstar would have to recreate the games from scratch. I stole the original, not a copy. But if we return to our world where copying is possible and Rockstar releases their game on platforms like PlayStation Store, Xbox Store, and so on, and I buy the game and make a copy to give to my friends, that's not theft. The author doesn't physically lose anything and I'm not taking anything away from him. If Rockstar members are watching this, I apologize for the bad example. If you still don't believe me, I'll prove it another way. In the 1985 case Dowling v. United States, the US Supreme Court ruled regarding copyright. Interference with copyright does not easily equate with theft, conversion, or fraud. The infringer of a copyright does not assume physical control over the copyright nor wholly deprive its owner of its use. Now simply replace the word copyright with the more conversational term piracy and the meaning becomes clear. So why do big companies tell you that piracy is theft and why are they so desperate for you not to pirate their products? The reason is simple, piracy isn't your problem, or in another word, not the consumer's problem. It's a problem of poor service. If the service was good and offered great benefits with a purchase, why wouldn't you buy it? Of course, these aren't my words, but those of Gabe Newell, the founder and CEO of Valve.
So, from our point of view, what we saw more and more is that piracy is a result of bad service on the part of game companies.
And if someone who has been hit by piracy more than anyone from users in countries like Russia, China, and smaller nations says this, why should someone who expects good service for their purchase think about fairness? If the service is bad and you buy it, then fairness isn't on your side. Many streamers in their streams condemn piracy, appealing to your honor by saying things like, if you can afford an expensive computer for $2,000 to $3,000, how can you not afford a $50 game? Are you poor? Are you a thief? And so on. Sure, this argument attacks your sense of honor and may push you to buy something you could have pirated and got more out of. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying paying is bad. You can and should pay, but only for services and products that are worth it. Let me show you an example of poor service paid for by a YouTuber with more than 2 million subscribers named Luis Rosman, who received a product worse than a pirate one. Because this person didn't mind paying for quality products, he always bought everything and never pirated. One day his girlfriend wanted to watch a Netflix show, so Luis bought her a Netflix subscription to enjoy the show in 4K, as Netflix promised. But when they launched the platform on their computer, to their disappointment, the show was only in 720p. This result was not what they expected, and in his video he highlighted the company's greed. It was clear that on a pirate site they could have gotten better quality than Netflix's platform. Sure, you could argue that 4K is meant for certain TVs and to get 4K you need a smart TV, etc. But when you pay a lot of money for good quality and service, the product should adapt to you, not the other way around. After all, you're spending your hard-earned money from a job where you sacrifice time and effort, and have never seen money fall from the sky every month. For example, I'll show you how people can buy any service without hesitation if the paid version is better than the pirated one. In 2000, Valve realized that the many people weren't paying for games and were instead downloading copies, so they decided to do something about it. Their solution was to create the Steam platform. When Valve realized that the pirated version of a game was no different from the licensed one, they created a centralized platform where it was very convenient to buy, download, and update games when new versions were released. Meanwhile, pirated versions couldn't be downloaded with a single click or updated within the platform over time. This also provided buyers with protections from third-party malware, meaning the customer knew that by purchasing the game they were gaining a huge advantage over the pirated version. This gave Steam a boost, and since then people have been buying games more frequently on Steam than on other gaming platforms like Epic Games, Ubisoft Store, and so on. When you buy a game on a Steam platform, you get a better experience than with the pirated version. The same can be said about music and films. For example, music platforms like Spotify and streaming services like Amazon Prime Video and Netflix have managed to reduce piracy in the music and movie industries by setting subscription prices that match the standard of living in different countries, considering their current economy and GDP. As we've seen, and as I mentioned earlier, many companies complain that piracy harms their sales analytics. But did you know that this hypocritical claim actually helps them, and it certainly doesn't reduce piracy? Let me explain simply. When you pirate games, movies, music, etc., you're essentially using a temporary free version of these products. At some point, when you realize it's worth buying, you do so, which ultimately boosts sales. In other words, piracy works like free advertising, and many companies prefer that you pirate their products at first, so you can leave feedback along them to improve their products in the future. This helps grow their customer base, attracting more and more buyers. That's why I said at the beginning that piracy is not inherently evil. So when piracy exists, it creates artificial competition for big corporations and developers, pushing them to create high-quality services and make products that clearly answer the question, why should I buy this? The competition between pirated products and those from the developers benefits us, the regular users. Of course, in this video, I don't mean to suggest that you should pirate everything. Piracy is indeed bad if you abuse it. For example, if you play masterpiece games like God of War, Far Cry 3, Detroit, The Witcher 3, and so on using pirated versions, you are simply refusing to thank the developers for their hard work and missing out on the various opportunities that the licensed version offers. The same goes for music. By listening to music on pirated third-party sites, you're likely to encounter ads that will spoil your listening experience. And without piracy, masterpieces in films, games, affordable services, and much more wouldn't exist either. In general, I hope you understand the main idea of this video. If you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate a like and subscription to the channel. See you all later.